Welcome to my grandpa's train. Today on my workbench is another HO scale steam locomotive project. This is a die-cast locomotive, very heavy. I picked up locally, and I unboxed this in my 10 pounds of steam engines unboxing video not long ago. And what I'm going to do in this video is do a mechanical restoration. I'm going to wash the shell, put it back together, and I'll make this thing operate once again. There are a few things wrong with this already. There is no drawbar on the tender. I'll have to install a coupler. This linkage is disconnected on this side. I think this is the only one that's not correct. Let's take a look at the other side. Well, there is something missing on this side as well. It looks like the whole top assembly for the top half of the piston is gone up here. But I think it'll still operate without that. So I'm just going to fix it without that, and let's get this shell off. It looks like there's a lot of screws on this, but these two here, this one and this one, plus one in the smokestack, are how you get into this locomotive. So with those three screws, the shell comes off. Very heavy die-cast shell. Should have lots of traction. Here is our drive mechanism for this 282 locomotive. Our Pitman style motor back here, rubber tube linkage, and then the drive gear system. So what needs to happen to this is I will probably strip this down into its individual pieces, wash everything either in the ultrasonic cleaner or at the sink with some less aggressive soap. And then I will get this motor cleaned up so it runs smooth, and then this linkage will get reattached. Now there is a pin underneath here that is still intact, so I think I have to pull this off to get it to pop back into the pin, and that should repair that broken linkage. This side, like I said, there's not a whole lot I can do about this because those pieces just don't exist and I can't make them, and it's probably going to be like way more than the engine is worth to try to buy pieces. So let's see, the next thing I want to do, I'll prop this up on some things here. I just want to apply power to the motor and see if anything happens. Being that this is a good old Pitman style motor and it doesn't look too disgusting, I suspect it's going to fire right up. Let's take a look and see. Wow, this thing runs really good. I don't know when the last time it was serviced, but man, this thing just took off and runs like a top. So it'll definitely need a little cleaning, lubrication, and all that. We'll be in business. This is probably going to be one of the easiest locomotive restorations I've done in quite a while. Well, this is probably one of the fastest locomotives I've been able to take apart in quite some time. I had this entire thing disassembled in probably less than 5 minutes. I have a parts tray here, so I have everything where it's supposed to be. The front and rear trucks, the front of the pilot, and the steam chest, the motor, and the drive shaft, some screws, and then our drivetrain comes out of the frame just like that. So this is one of the older models of this locomotive that has the brass bushings in the frame. So just like that, the entire locomotive is completely torn down, except for this gearbox up here. I want to be careful with that so things don't go flying. Alright, the next thing to do is get this cleaned up, and I'll be back when it is put back together. Before I finish putting this together, I just want to do a little demonstration how this locomotive runs. Alright, as you can see, the Mantua 282 is put back together and ready to go on my workbench. I just want to show you a few things that I did to it. As I had shown, I completely stripped down this locomotive down to the individual components. I cleaned and lubricated the drivetrain. I cleaned and polished the commutators on the motor, which is now back inside. Also, I straightened out and repaired the handrails, which were quite bent on the top of the locomotive. One thing I noticed is that this handrail is steel because it was a little rusted. The other one was replaced because it appears to be made out of brass. I polished all of the driving wheels on this locomotive because they were quite filthy, and this side here picks up electricity, so these were polished. I noticed that this one is a slightly different wheel than all the others. This locomotive also had no drawbar, so I manufactured one out of a sheet of this plastic here, and I cut it with a scissors to about the shape and size I wanted, and then I drilled 2 holes for the screws to fit through. Both screws were in place, and then I manufactured these washers to hold it in place, and I made it about 1 1/8 inches long, I believe it is, between the 2 screws, which is just a hair too short, but it looks better this way running. It doesn't like to run on 18-inch radius curves, even though the engine is designed to do that, but this one will run just fine on 22-inch radius curves. The problem is that if the engine is turning on tighter radius, it will touch the tender between the cab, and because the locomotive and tender are opposite polarity, being one side of the track is picked up by the tender and the other is picked up by the locomotive, these two will short out. So either make a longer drawbar to prevent that, or don't run it on tight radius curves. This locomotive doesn't have a coal load in the tender. I might remedy that by using this package of Woodland Scenics lump coal, which I found on the shelf in my basement. Katy coupler was installed. The other thing I'm considering is repainting this locomotive. The tender definitely would need to be repainted. I can see that the paint has worn off in places, and it appears to have been maroon, or maroon primer was used on this engine at one point. But the paint on the engine isn't bad. It's mostly the tender that's in need of repainting. On the other side, it is worn off. So I'm considering, let me know what you think. Should I repaint this locomotive? And if I do, what color should I paint it? I'm thinking this would look good as a royal blue locomotive, although I know that the models they made were the Pacific, but yeah, it might be a fun experiment. Or should I just leave it alone as is, which I'm going to do for now. Alright, this concludes the rebuilding of my 1948 Mantua Mikado 282 steam locomotive. This is going to be the first in a short series on my metal steam locomotives and repairing them. Now, I'm going to take this over to the track and let's test it out. First, I will pull a set of vintage passenger cars and Mantua Tyco passenger cars, and then I will hook it up to my 1950s vintage freight set.